Hello, everybody. Today, we're doing another movie review. This time, we are discussing Father of the Bride 2, the sequel to Father of the Bride 1, of course. Now, not only does this movie have a lot of family dynamics to talk about, it also has a lot of ageism and themes of struggling with getting older. So my guest today is Maureen Wiley Clough. She hosts the It Gets Late Early podcast, a show all about getting older in the corporate world and the challenges that come along with it. So we're combining topics today, family dynamics and aging. They often go hand in hand, so it seemed relevant. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. My name is Anthony Franzese. You're listening to the Successful Working Parents podcast. Normally we interview working parents, but we've been having some fun switching it up, talking about parenting dynamics in movies. I appreciate you listening. If you enjoy this episode, please follow, share with a friend. Anyway, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents podcast. Today we are talking about the 1995 hit, The Father of the Bride Part 2. My guest today is Maureen Wiley Clough. Maureen, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I love being on your show. It's the second time for me.
Yeah, really excited. Only my second repeat guest, so I'm pretty excited to have you on here. Yeah,
I appreciate that. It means a lot.
I will link to our original conversation, but for those of the audience that don't know who you are, why don't you give them a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Maureen, and I have a podcast called It Gets Late Early, which is all about the experience of getting older in the youth-dominated and obsessed tech industry. We verge into talking about getting older in corporate too, of course, because a lot of what we explore in this realm of tech is also apropos of corporate. But I was called a dino at age 37 at my tech startup, and I realized that the person who called me that was actually kind of right. Like, there were not very many older people at the organization. I was like, holy crap. And then I realized that was true across the course of my entire career, even at larger, more mature organizations. And I thought, there's something here. Why is no one talking about this? So now I'm basically on a mission to ensure that people of all ages can work as long as they want, or sadly, in some cases, need to work. And that my hypothesis is that employers and employees are going to benefit from this. So essentially, your perceived value in the workplace should have absolutely nothing to do with the number of candles on your birthday cake, period. So.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm actually going to be 37 in like 2 weeks, so that's really hitting home for me as well.
Nice. Welcome aboard to dino status.
Yes, thank you. I always wanted to be a dinosaur since I was a young
right?
I mean,
they're pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, so when I reached out to you about talking about a movie that had some parenting dynamics, but also might have something relevant to the things that you talk about on your show, you would immediately thought of this, and I think it's a perfect fit. Like, what's your relationship like with this movie?
Well, first of all, I'm a huge Steve Martin fan. I absolutely adore him. And essentially, my dad is Steve Martin from Father of the Bride. Like, that is the exact character. So okay. I was like, so I saw Father of the Bride 1, of course, like as most people did. And it was just a phenomenal movie. And so recently I was watching with my kids, Father of the Bride. And then I was like, wait a second, Father of the Bride 2. And I actually had seen it before, but I totally forgot. And when I started watching it, I was like, holy shit. Like, I could not believe how ageist this movie was. And I actually did a talk recently at an HR sort of think tank, and it was called Disrupt HR. And they had a session that I led called Age, the Forgotten Part of the DEIB Equation. And in my talk, I actually referenced the fact that 1 in 2 of us out of the world population, according to the World Health Organization, is ageist. And I also referenced the fact that kids as young as age 4 are already known to spout off ageist stereotypes. And I was like, it's because of movies like this that they make aging look so bad. And my kids were watching this movie and I was like, oh gosh. And I'm like, this is where it starts. Yeah. It starts here. And so I realized, wow, this is the perfect movie to talk about. And by the way, like, I'm not immune to thinking that some of the jokes in there are funny. Like, they are. But that just goes to show you exactly how much of an undercurrent of ageism we have in our society and how accepted it is.
Well, I think also it speaks to just the culture and society's pressure on us to like not want to feel old and get old. So I think it's it's a pretty common feeling. So I do get that.
It's reinforced by stuff like this for sure.
Yeah,
so totally. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect movie. But yeah, huge Steve Martin fan. Diane Keaton too.
Yeah. So I had never seen either of these movies. Shocking.
What?
I never seen the first one. Yeah. So
Father of the Bride.
I never seen it. No. So I watched them both, of course. I just really quickly, I did really enjoy the first one. I mean, it hit close to home for me, being a girl dad, right? Like I thought a lot about my father-in-law as well, who was the father of the bride not that long ago. So I really enjoyed the movie. I totally get why it was a hit, and it totally rang true for me. So now when we come into Father of the Bride Part 2, the movie kicks off. First of all, just this opening montage I found just like very comforting and familiar. Just like just the nice music playing with all the different images of their house and the family life. Like it just made me feel like I was in the 90s in my mom's house.
Oh, yeah, such a 90s movie.
Yeah. And then we get a little exposition from Steve Martin narrating, which he did in the first one as well. And he's talking about how he's so excited to retire in like 5 years. And then he kind of hints that like until 9 months ago, something happens. Right. So we jump into this story where basically they're gathering the family together, and his kid announces, his daughter, who was the bride in the first movie, announces that they're having a baby. So this is really where the ageism kicks in, right? Because he's so upset that he's about to be a grandpa.
Oh yeah, he loses his mind.
He loses his mind. He does. First of all, he doesn't think his daughter's ready, but he's just like, I can't be a grandpa. Like I don't have hearing aids. Like I wear running shoes. Like I thought that was really exactly what you're talking about. Like he just so disgusted himself that he's not getting older. Like he's not like nothing's happening to his body. He just is getting a new title.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny to think about his reaction versus that of the mother, Diane Keaton, because she was like elated to become a grandmother. And it's way harder to be a woman and age in this society, but she handled it so well. But yeah, it was funny. It was like an immediate midlife crisis trigger, like right there. It was
Yeah. Well, we'll get into some of Diane Keaton's experiences as well. But yeah, I mean, is this something that you find is like perpetuating the stereotype and perpetuating the challenge? Like, should people just be obviously just embracing this news like this and excited about? They never really talk about what age is exactly, but I assume he's in his late 40s, early 50s. So that's something that people should learn to embrace more, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say being a grandparent in your late 40s, early 50s is probably pretty early for a lot of people, especially today. It seems like people are having kids later and later. Of course, that depends on certain environments and all that. But yeah, I mean, he like lost his mind. And so I think there is a reality that we are all just a little bit ageist because we've seen movies like this, frankly. It's like where we've seen that, if you're a grandfather, that equates in your mind immediately to people with like walkers who can't see well, right? And that's exactly where he went in his mind. So yeah, I mean, this is a thing that I think probably will happen for a good number of people. I don't think Steve Martin's alone in this, right? In the way in which he reacts to it.
Yeah. And again, shout out to my father-in-law, Bob. I don't know if he's listening, but I thought of him again in this one because he also did, grapple with being labeled as a grandpa when my child is his first grandchild. And so it's so true even today. On the flip side, I think you'd want to be a young grandfather because you almost like, I'm sort of like, not worried, but I'm thinking about, I had kids kind of late. Like I'll likely be much older if and when my daughter has kids. And so I'm going to be like an old grandpa. Like you kind of want to be able to be young with your grandkids.
Yeah, you would think so. But I think there's a sense that, we only have so much time left. Like that's a very human thing. Like we're all grappling with our mortality every day. It's why we try and, distract ourselves with any number of things to get through life. But, I think it just that passing of time, that sense that you're moving into the next stage, I think can be a really legitimately scary thing for people. And so like, I can understand how some people have that sort of frame of reference and mindset when they get there. But you're right. Like I want to be a young-ish enough grandma that I can have like the wherewithal to go do a bunch of shit. But I will say, again, that points to the stereotypes that we still have in our heads. For example, I know someone who's in my husband's family who is 81 and could like kick my ass in anything physical whatsoever. Like he's the most like with it, like so all over the place, like blows my mind. Same with my father-in-law. He's just, he does triathlons. It's nuts. And I could definitely not do that. So it's just, I mean, I'd have to try a lot, but I mean, we have
not with that attitude.
Assumptions. Exactly. Yes, it's on me. But we have these assumptions about what people can and cannot do based on age, and they're all wrong. So,
right. Yeah.
It's very specific to the person.
Yeah. And so, he's having like a real crisis. He goes to the gym all of a sudden to try to like prove that he's young. When he gets his hair dyed, I don't think I ever I'm a big Steve Martin fan too. I don't think I ever saw him not with the white hair. So I was really taken aback by that look.
Yeah. Me neither. I mean, the guy doesn't age. He looks the exact same to me now as he did in this movie in the 90s. It's wild. But yeah, he's always had that white hair. But yeah, he immediately goes and gets it dyed brown. Or yeah, looked kind of like blackish gray. It was a strange color, but it did not look good. But yeah, he just like did all the midlife crisis things immediately. He just went straight there.
Yeah, he did. So I was trying to figure out, I think they purposely never say how old that they both are. But at one point he says to them that between them, they're almost 100. So we can assume
I saw that too.
They're like, I guess, both late 40s.
Yep.
But yeah, he's really feeling himself with his brown hair or black hair, and he comes home and he puts the moves on her, and then
and she's like, "Ooh, George Banks, what has gotten into you?" Which again, I thought was really funny and also like vaguely ageist as well, because guess what? People in their 40s and 50s have sex.
Right. Yeah. Like, yeah, they made it seem like this was something they hadn't done in so long.
Right.
Yeah. So this all kind of culminates in this decision to decide to sell the house. He wants to get like a beach condo, and they had this like circumstance where this guy, Mr. Habib, played by Eugene Levy, offers to buy the house, and they have to be out in 10 days. So by the way, I got to be one of the few people that watches these two movies back to back, but he's in the first one briefly.
Yes, I remember.
You did remember that?
Yes, okay. Yes, I love Eugene Levy.
Yeah, he was like a random like audition to be a singer or something, different character.
Exactly, that's right.
Yeah. I read online that there's a controversy around this part because I think people thought it was offensive.
Yeah, I was thinking it was pretty offensive. I was like, "Ooh, this would not fly today." Mm-mm.
Yeah, I mean the Franck character played by Martin Short.
Yeah,
I think it's supposed to be silly and it's like supposed to be like over the top, so maybe it's a little bit less offensive. But I think Mr. B was like meant to be like more done, like done with some seriousness to it. So yeah, I could see why that wouldn't fly. But anyway, he offers to buy the house in 10 days. I don't know if you noticed there was the $1,000 bills he was shelling out. He had literal $1,000 bills. It was like $15,000 in cash if he would like sell the dishes, and he agrees. Now we get to the point where he announces it to the kids, and then we start to have this really like somber moment. He's remembering all the times that he played basketball with his daughter, and this is when it started to get to me a little bit of like all these memories that they just fly by.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's
if you remember things at all, which
if you remember things at all,
sometimes it's not so easy for some of us.
Yeah. How old is your kid?
I got a 7 and 9 year old.
7 and 9 year old. Okay, so you surely can relate to like how fast the 9 and 7 years are flying by. Yeah. If you were moving out of your house, what do you think would be like the memory that you'd really be like harping on as like a special memory between you and your kids in your house?
Oh my gosh. Wow. I mean, I don't know that I can point to one specific thing, actually. I think it would probably be just your average routine, like going to bed, reading stories, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I wish I had like one crystallized, very cool one, but I'm coming up empty for you.
No hoop in the driveway?
No hoop in the driveway. Nope, not yet. Maybe we'll change it.
Yeah, it's not too late. Okay, so then they're staying at the in-laws' house, right? They have this like the scene with the dogs, and he's scared of the dogs.
Which is ridiculous. Like, who's letting dogs take over a bed to make two 50-year-olds sleep on the floor? It's not.
First of all, if there's like two Dobermans that are showing like any aggression towards me, I'm definitely not staying anywhere near. Like, I'm out.
This was a ludicrous scene, especially in light of the scene in the first movie where the Dobermans are like off trying to get him as he's stealing the wallet or the bank statement from Mr. McKenzie.
Oh,
like,
totally. Yeah,
dude, come on, you are not dog sitting for those dogs.
No, I would definitely wouldn't. And then he offers. I guess he sleeps on the floor instead of one of the many other rooms in the house because the wife is already comfortable. I don't know really what that was about either.
Ridiculous.
And then speaking of the kind of the ageism part, the wife then has her own kind of journey where she thinks she's going through menopause.
Yep.
And the husband's like, you couldn't possibly be going through menopause. Like, you're not old enough.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and I thought, first and foremost, I would say it was good to see that they were actually talking openly about menopause, because no one does that. Like, it's something that's just kind of hush-hush. No one discusses it. Even today, it's coming out a little bit more and more. You're seeing a lot of people, Hollywood stars, talking about it. For example, Naomi Watts, she has a business that's all about women in menopause. And, you're seeing people talk about it finally. But back then, it was not really done. And it also is emblematic of exactly how little it was talked about, because she's like, I don't know, maybe it's menopause, maybe it's not. no one talks about it. And so
Right.
no one knows. So I actually really like that they talk about it. And it was very realistic because even today, no one knows. So,
Yeah, I feel like it's just becoming a topic in the
just
corporate
now.
world that I'm in. And you're seeing a little bit
Just
of
now.
like companies to talk about it. I mean, if she didn't stumble upon that book and that magazine, that's really how she kind of thought about it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Because like your doctor doesn't tell you, like, what? Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. So now we've kind of set up the premise because it turns out she's not going through menopause. She's pregnant, right? So his wife is pregnant and his daughter's pregnant, and all of a sudden he doesn't, he wants to be old again, right? He doesn't want to be a kid because now he doesn't want to be young because now he realizes he's too old to have a kid. So he's really torn between these two things. I'm having I was trying to think about like what that experience would be like if you're, how would you feel if you were pregnant while your mother was pregnant?
I don't think I would enjoy it very much.
No, I assume. No. Was she around to like help you out during your pregnancy and when your
she
kids were born?
And I think especially, well, I don't know. I will say this. I think that a lot of women these days are actually having kids later and later. And so it's not necessarily uncommon at all for women in their mid to late 40s, even early 50s occasionally to have children. So things are shifting. But yeah, I can imagine even just from the perspective of like, hey, this is my time to go through pregnancy and like have my mom helping me out. And like, I want to feel supported to like, oh shit, like you're doing this too. Like we're going through it together, which is kind of a cool thing. But also like, I want my mom right now. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You want that support system. Yeah. Like my mother-in-law was very helpful when my wife was pregnant and when our baby was born. If she was 9 months pregnant at the same time,
right,
and had a baby at the same time, it would have been very, unfortunate.
Because it's harder. There's wear and tear on your body as you get older, and so a pregnancy that you had in your mid 30s versus like early 40s, or excuse me, like late 40s, early 50s, like that would feel different and be very different to go through.
Yeah, and then of course, this is like a good part of like the relationship between George and his wife because he's really not thinking about her at all. Right. And so he's right. he's just like so worried about himself. He's not even considering like, oh, well, my wife's pregnant. She's probably going through it too.
Exactly.
And so she kind of flips out on him and he has to
with like very good reason. She's like, dude, I'm the one having the baby. Like, stop.
Right. Right.
Stop whining.
Yeah. Now he stumbles upon the house. I don't know was he just like walking the block when he like saw his old house was about to get demolished?
Yeah, which was like the most ludicrous scene. But
yes.
So we definitely have to talk about that. But I also want to talk about my favorite scene in the entire movie.
Okay.
Can I do that?
Yeah, please.
Because I'm going to back you up just very slightly.
Yeah.
So right after they leave the doctor's office and they know that they are, and she's not like dying of cancer and it's not menopause, it's actually that they're pregnant. They have a scene where George and Nina are in the car driving down the street and they're both looking out the window and they happen to see kids with their parents on either side of the street. So Nina looks out the side of her window on the left and she sees mothers running down the street with their children, blissfully happy, etc. And every time George looks out the window on his side of the street, he sees like kids screaming at their parents, like a kid like throwing food at his dad and all this stuff. And Nina's like, George, I need to know how you feel about this. And he's seen all this stuff and he's like, I feel great. So he just like totally lies through this. Yeah. But I loved that scene so much. I thought it was so well done.
Yeah, because you can imagine the difference in like what's going through each other's heads and like what they're feeling about the situation.
I will say though, like obviously I think that was very heavily stereotyped. Like, oh, the woman clearly is going to be so excited about this and like Mother Nature and, Earth Mom, whatever. And actually I know plenty of women, probably myself included, who if I got pregnant right now or later even, I'm only in my early 40s now, but if I got pregnant later, my reaction would be like, oh shit, like, oh no, this was not in the cards. I did not plan this. This is a big wrinkle. Like, because as George points out, like, I thought we were done. I thought we were going into this this new phase of life where we have kids who are about to fly the coop and then we get a new chapter. And instead I'm starting back at point 0, right? Like at the starting line once again with a new kid. And I think a lot of women would feel that way too.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's, worth mentioning, like, they don't really debate whether they're going to have the kid or not. Right?
No,
they just,
no.
Like, maybe that's an off-screen conversation, but it's just like, yeah, we're having a baby is
right.
But, in the 90s in California, I suppose there were there were still other options, but they're just going for it.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to do the math on like, would it make sense that they would be so close together because they announce that they're having kids. The daughter does, that they're pregnant, and then the parents get pregnant a little bit later. There's got to be at least a couple months between them, right?
I'm not sure. I don't know when the night in question that oh my gosh, that reminds me of another scene. Do you remember when he was telling everybody that they're going to have a baby? And he's like, well, your mom and I, this one night, we had the house all to ourselves. And I was like, oh, stop. Like, no one wants to hear that about their parents. That's never, come on, man.
That was a tough one. Yeah.
That was rough. I was like, do less.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess if they told their parents like right away when they found out, then I guess, it could work out. But I was just thinking like, usually, you wait a few weeks to tell people, and then just the timing just to me was a little off, but
yeah, I think they probably came right out with it if we're to believe the timeline of this movie.
Yeah.
Right?
The one character we haven't mentioned yet is, Kieran Culkin. Like not enough use out of the guy, right? Like
you're right.
I mean, I guess this is before he maybe hit his stride because he's so great in Succession, of course, but it would have been nice to see. I feel like he was a little bit an afterthought. I thought it was funny when early on, he was like, isn't it weird that I'm only 13? I'm going to be an uncle.
Yes. I loved that.
Kind of like further perpetuating this ageism challenge that the movie has. It was
so good. He also had one other line that killed me. He was like, remember when they're talking about like what the kid's last name will be? And they're like, whoa, we're going to hyphenate Banks McKenzie. And he was like, Dad, don't let a guy get named Cooper Banks McKenzie. They'll think he's a law firm. And I was like, that is so good.
Yeah. I actually had it in my notes. Like, where do you stand on making a new last name for a baby? I don't think I've heard that one before.
Yeah, it's not something that would ever cross my mind. It's a little out there for me, but I'm sure some people do it. Yeah, I'm sure it's done.
Certainly the hyphenation happens. Mm-hmm. I actually know one couple that the man took the woman's name. Shout out! They're not listening, but shout out to them anyway. But I mean, you see that every now and then. But yeah, to just make a whole new last name that only the kid has, I thought that was interesting. Like, concept.
Imagine explaining that to people.
I know it'd be so. I mean, it would make school a nightmare, right? I think it'd be like, exactly. What's going on here? Okay, but yeah, so he buys the house back for $100,000 extra. I never bought a house or sold a house, but they make it seem way too transactional. Like there's all kinds of fees involved. I know it's a whole thing.
Oh yeah, it's not like back of the napkin. Like here, dude, here's a couple thousand. No, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, they made it seem like it was like a receipt that he could kind of give back, and like he would just give him back what he had originally paid plus $100,000.
Yeah, not reasonable.
And I also thought I was surprised how happy the wife was. Like she was mad at him until like there was like this triumphant music. He buys the house back, and then she like all is forgiven. I guess
I'd be like, you idiot!
Yeah,
you just lost $100,000.
Yeah, like first
retirement fund or
first you're not like listening to my feelings at all while I'm newly pregnant, and then you like leave and go buy the house and spend $100,000 extra on a house we don't need.
Nina Banks is a saint.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, she is. So Andy's also moving to Boston. Which again, like the idea of my daughter moving so far away across the country, like really was starting to bum me out. But it was almost an afterthought to all the other issues that they were having.
Right.
They kind of like gloss over this concept. We have all these false alarms about when to go to the hospital and when not to.
Did you have any false alarms?
I was just going to ask you that. You first.
Yes, I had one false alarm. I didn't get all the way to the hospital though, but I was like calling and freaking out, and they're like, "Yeah, it's not close enough." But yeah, it's a very curious thing that you don't really know. It's a very interesting thing about humanity all this time, and we still can't figure that out. I know,
and yeah, people get sent home all the time. We kind of had the opposite, where we were hoping it was a false alarm. It was like 3 weeks out, and then after a couple hours, we're like, all right, I guess this
is happening.
Yeah, we were on a train coming home from a pool party. So yeah, but
the good old days,
good old days,
days.
Yes, but we made it back. Nice. But yeah, so then we have a bunch of false alarms. Frank and also his assistant, played by J.D. Wong from Jurassic Park. Which this is one of my favorite things about like watching an old movie is like, oh yeah, that's that guy from that thing.
Right?
So
Yeah,
I
totally.
enjoyed that. They're at the house. They've essentially moved into the house at this point.
Which is so weird. I'm like, what are
Yeah.
you guys? How are you always here?
Yeah. And then we have kind of, I guess what would be like the main like climax of the movie is Frank gives George a sleeping pill from his home country.
Oh my
He
gosh.
passes out instantly on the table because he takes two on accident. And then of course that's when Annie goes into labor.
Classic. Because
Yeah.
how could it not go that way?
Yeah.
You know?
And I was just thinking like, well, maybe just leave him behind. I don't know. Like,
Yeah. Maybe
like everybody went to the hospital. Yeah. I mean, again, like it takes hours, right? So like, I don't know that everybody needed to go to the hospital at that moment, but
it wouldn't have been an exciting Hollywood movie if they hadn't.
correct.
So.
Right. They had it like for the look of it, they had to go through with that. Now I didn't know that there was like prostate screening rooms like in the ER like that, but
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was a strange.
I've been to a few hospitals and emergency rooms. I never like it's usually not so. Oh, there was like a ward. There was like a wing of prostate screenings that was like right in the ER.
Oh my gosh, so hilarious.
Yeah, that was funny, and then that woke him up, right?
I think would wake most people up. Yeah,
a little more. We get a little more ageism when he hates on the young doctor.
Exactly. Yeah,
played by Jane Addams, who I knew from Hung. Actually, I don't know. She's in a bunch of stuff.
Oh yeah, I'd never seen her before.
Yeah, she's like I think she's known as like more of an independent actress. She was in like a short-lived Showtime show called Hung with Thomas Jane.
I heard of that one. Yeah, I heard of that one, but I never saw it.
But yeah, he's kind of, and I think this is also like the opposite side of ageism when like people like don't give people enough respect when they're too young, and then she kind of like states her credentials, and it's like like judge somebody on like what they're capable of, not necessarily or what they've accomplished, not necessarily like how old they are, how old they look.
It's exactly what we discussed when you came on my show.
That's right. Yeah,
you were working in Wall Street Wall Street, and they were like, "Hey, young man, what are you doing?"
I'm flattered you remembered.
Of course, I remember. You were one of my first guests. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
But and some people call it reverse ageism, right?
Right.
Where it's the respect is not there for people who are younger. But I'm gonna go ahead and cop to having a little bit of ageism sometimes when it comes to doctors, and it's like it's so unfair, but it's so real. And so I totally understood what George Banks was feeling when he saw this younger doctor. He's like, dude, have you done this before? And it's sad because like you have to get experience by doing things, right? And so people who are earlier in their careers in medicine, like there's no way around that. You're going to face that because when you're talking about life or death issues, like you want someone who's done it a lot, right? And that's just like a very human thing. It's funny how ageism in the medical field is like the exact opposite of ageism in tech, for example, right? Or corporate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I have had that same thought. You know, I hope the doctor is experienced. I hope the doctor's been doing this for a while. But then there is a moment when it like flips and you're like, oh, is the doctor still capable? Like physically, you know, is everything good? So doctors probably have it pretty tough in this realm, right?
I mean, I'd love to see the data, but I would bet that doctors are like the career that people have the most, or like the service that people have the most preference for, right? Like people want, probably some people want a male or a female depending on what who they are and what they're getting done. Like I bet like of all the professions or services, you know, I don't know what else people really care so much about the demographic of the person that's doing the thing other than a doctor.
And it's not fair because there's only one way to get experience, and you can be incredibly gifted at a younger age as a physician. And so like, I recognize that I'm wrong for thinking that, but like, I get that. Yeah.
And you can, on the flip side, obviously you can be doing it a long time and not be that good or just kind of over it. Like sometimes you want a younger doctor because you feel like they might be more on the cutting edge as well.
That's why I want a team of doctors with a range of ages, like the same thing I would want in any sort of corporate setting, right? Because it's that sort of team that's diverse in age that's going to have the best outcomes, period. Because, you know, doctors confer with one another if they have questions or if they're not quite sure about a diagnosis. And if you have people across that spectrum, you're going to have better outcomes for your patients. So that's the move there.
Right. Also, where do you stand on calling your in-laws mom and dad?
Yeah, I'm a no. I'm a hard no. What about you?
I'm a no. I mean, I don't think it's like if my in-laws were into that, I would be okay with it. I think I don't think it's their style. I feel like,
is it anyone's?
I think it's like an old Italian thing. I feel like
Oh,
some
really?
old school Italians. Yeah, I've
Oh,
definitely
that's
seen that a
cool.
little bit in my family. So I get it. I've never done it. I don't think it would be. I think my in laws would be confused if I did it. So I haven't gone there. But I thought it was interesting how the son in law just goes for it the whole time.
Didn't land well
No,
for
didn't.
George Banks.
Correct.
He wasn't a fan.
Not his favorite thing. No.
No.
So the Diane Keaton Nina has a C-section and Annie delivers the baby, and both babies are born the same day. Wouldn't you know it?
I mean,
And
that's so weird. I can't
yeah,
imagine how in Hollywood that would have transpired.
yeah. They also like maybe it was different in the '90s, but they kind of just brought the baby out into the
Yeah.
waiting room and just walked away. Especially after a C-section, I feel like there's a lot more
It's not
going
how it
on.
works.
Yeah, not how it works, right? We did
Not how it
that
works.
recently. Yeah, it's definitely not how it works. So I thought that was funny.
Although to be fair, it would have been boring to like watch and wait for all of that to happen.
Yeah, like the recovery room
Yeah,
and just yeah, they didn't show that part. Who
not
knows? Maybe
scintillating.
maybe it was 20 hours later. We don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
And then the daughter moves to Boston.
Mm-hmm.
They have this really touching moment like in the hospital between the husband and wife and the father and the daughter. They're all being there for each other, and I really appreciate that because the one thing that kind of is through line throughout both these movies is like a really tight family unit.
Yeah,
right. Like
I agree.
The father and the daughter get along so well. There's really never any. He's protective of her, but he figures out he is able to wrap his head around it. He's not like really fanatical about it. He figures out ways to let her go and is eventually like mature about it. So I think that they have a really like stable, maybe a little too stable and unrealistic family dynamic, but it is nice to see. It's nice to see, what a good support system can look like.
I agree. I mean, I would totally sign up to be in the Banks family.
Yeah.
To be
Oh
honest.
yeah.
They seem like they've got it going on. It's like, what's our representation of that now? Like the Kardashians? Like, I don't know.
I mean, imagine, Kieran Culkin from Succession. Like
God.
he clearly didn't grow up in the Banks house, right? Like,
No, he did not.
That kid's gonna have a pretty stable, other than being like a 13-year-old uncle.
Yeah.
So his sister and his niece are the same age, I guess, is what's
Right.
happening.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Which
other
would
than
be
that,
a little trippy. Like I remember those sorts of things tripping me up when I was a child, like trying to understand how families could have different generational things like that and have it make sense in my feeble brain. It probably still would confuse me. It's still confusing.
Yeah, agreed. And I guess the idea is like he has a daughter to like replace
Exactly
the loss of Annie.
Of course she's a daughter.
Yeah, right. And so yeah, they all live happily ever after. Now there was a part 3. I don't know if you saw it. It was like a COVID special.
I didn't, and I really want to see it. Did you see it?
I didn't see it. I saw that it existed, and I was like, maybe I think it's like a 30-minute special. So I wanted to kind
Steve Martin in it?
I believe I think they're all in it, and I think
I'm in.
Yeah,
I'm gonna see
so
it.
we can maybe do an addendum to that after we watch that.
We should.
All right, a few things to discuss. So, what do you think has aged poorly since 1995?
Pretty much the whole movie. Yeah, I would say. Yeah, it's certainly the way we look, even in our 40s and 50s. Just their attire, everything. It's super outdated. I mean, they look, I would say, 2 decades older than most 40-year-olds I know. So that whole thing. I think some of it is real, just like the shifting of phases and stages in life, like the, oh my gosh, this is new, this is difficult to comprehend, like that would remain today. But I think a lot of what happened in the movie, I'm not going to say I didn't laugh at it, but like it's definitely really ageist. Like it's 100% ageist, and it's not keeping up. And again, I mean, this was the 90s, but it's not keeping up with just the reality. Humans are living longer and healthier lives. And we aren't seeing that in this movie. We're seeing people who are like, holy shit, it's over. I do think it ended on a bit of more of a hopeful note, but there was a part that was also really touching that I thought was resonant and could still stand today, which is like, I want to be, George Banks says essentially like, I want to make sure that I can do it right this next time and give this kid the kind of childhood that my other 2 children had. And he was worried that at more of an advanced age, he wouldn't be able to do that. And I will say, I think that's legit in the sense that if I were to have a baby tomorrow, I would be worried that I wouldn't have as much energy because I can feel myself slowing down in that way. Like, I think Sometimes that's true for people. Sometimes that's not. I don't think it's a broad brushstroke kind of thing. I've seen it in myself, but who knows? Maybe I'd surprise myself and like rise to the occasion. But yeah, I think there's the whole concept of like resetting from the starting line that I think is still very reasonable to think that that would be part of a movie today. But yeah, I mean, this shit still happens all the time. I mean, there's ageist stuff in sitcoms and movies all the time. So I don't think things have changed much. And I think that they need to start shifting. And the good news is that we've had more recently some representation of older people in movies that I think is like a lot more positive. Like look at Frankie and what's that called? God, Maureen, come on.
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm trying to something in Frankie. And that shows like two women in their older years like having a great life and doing all sorts of cool stuff, right?
Frankie and Grace.
Thank you. I was like
Grace and Frankie, actually.
Grace and I know I always mess it up, but yeah, I mean, you see stuff like that, and you see like the new horrendous Sex and the City reboot, and so you see women in their 50s like going out and hanging out in New York City and doing all the things they did back in their 30s, right? So there's some, but yeah, I think you still see just as much like ageist bullshit on the silver screen. So
it's interesting because definitely like. I don't know that it's aged well, but it is still true today that some people don't like that they're going to be called grandma or grandpa all of a sudden, right? But some people, I think, do. I think some people like my mom was really excited to become a grandmother. Do you think that comes from, or where do you think that comes from? Like, why do you think some people have this like dread of aging, and some people are able to be excited about what comes with older age?
You know, I think it's probably a pretty individualized thing, but I will say in general, I think it's a lot harder for women than men, which is why I thought that depiction of George Banks versus Dina's reaction was not very emblematic. Like women have been told that we need to look as young as possible forever, and we all buy anti-aging cream. There are even kids like 12-year-olds who go to Sephora and look for that stuff now. Like it's very much a thing and part of our culture. So I think that's a huge part of it. And so when you're a grandma, you have this connotation of like what that means and how you look and all of that stuff. And people want to avoid that, right? I think that there are people who have a much healthier view of aging and are excited about reaching the next milestone and all the joy that it can bring. And, those people are hashtag blessed because it apparently can add up to 7.5 years of literal life to your life if you have a positive view of aging. And that's based on research by Dr. Becca Levy, which is wild. And that's more than like going to the gym, not smoking, sleeping right, etc. It's crazy. So our thoughts are really, really powerful. And yet even still, women are so strong. We outlive men, even with the horrible thoughts of aging that we have and that awful stuff that we're up against. But yeah, I think some people maybe feel, here's my hypothesis. I think some people probably feel like they've actually accomplished the things that they'd hoped to by certain yardsticks, and they might be more okay with reaching those next phases of life, because I think with each new phase of life, you wonder, like, have I done enough? And this is something that I think is really toxic in our society, this like push to achieve young and 30 under 30 lists and all that stuff. It's like we're all running so fast, we like don't even stop to enjoy what we're doing or appreciate where we are. We're focused on the future, and then we fret about the past, right? So I feel like a lot of people have really I feel like a lot of people really have complicated thoughts when it comes to aging and passing from one stage to another. And that, I think, is very much across the gender spectrum.
Yeah, I agree. Favorite parenting moment?
Favorite parenting moment in that movie? Let me think. You're going to have to edit this, obviously.
For me, I thought it was...
I'm like, wheels turning, coffee, come on.
I'll play the Jeopardy music.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I didn't think there was such exceptional parenting throughout this movie necessarily. So I'm
well, there wasn't really, because when he first finds out that Annie's pregnant, his initial reaction is like, she's too young, like she can't do it. Meanwhile, like we know like they did it at a similar age. But I think that, first of all, I just think it's nice to see that when Annie's dealing with issues with her husband, she feels like she can confide in her father or in her parents.
I forgot about that part.
What I mean?
That is it.
That was really nice. And then just having all those memories and reminiscing, and that, playing basketball together when they were going to sell the house, that was like the last thing they wanted to do was like, one more game of hoops. So I thought that was nice too.
It was touching. It's a little too saccharine for me personally, but yes, it was touching. I think you're right though. I think the best parenting moment was just his ability to support her when she was having a hard time with Brian, which is exactly how it was in the first movie too, right? Like she could always come to him with any issues she was facing with Brian, and he was always there. And those were the moments when he showed up as the best version of himself instead of being like this neurotic freak. He was like, okay, even though I don't like she's getting married, or even though I might not be ready to be a grandpa, like I'm going to show up in the way that she needs. And so he was a super good dad in those moments for sure.
Yeah.
Like applaud.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, worst parenting moments, I think, a lot of the initial reactions to the pregnancy.
They weren't great.
Yeah, they weren't great. I think that there was he was also like blaming the kids a little bit for like, oh, like it's their fault that I'm going to be a grandpa now. Like, I feel like he was projecting a lot onto them. Yep. Instead of just like being happy for them and embracing the situation.
He definitely made it about himself. So
he made it about himself. Yeah.
Like really bad parenting and spousal moment for him.
What was your favorite scene? Was it when they were driving along in the car?
I think that was my favorite. I just thought that was so brilliantly done. The way they had the two frames and, the perspective from Nina and how it was so glowing and beautiful. And then his like abject horror and all these scenes unfolding that completely contributed to his fear about what was going to happen next.
Yeah. I mean, look, I know it's a little bit ageist, but the montage of his midlife crisis, like I did enjoy.
That was pretty good too. Yeah. It really was. But yeah, like, it's okay that it was ageist. I mean, again, it like just drives home like how accepted this is, and like no one thought twice about just the person doing a podcast about getting older thought it was a problem, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, and you know what? I mean, you could argue that they're making fun of that because it is a negative reaction to have, right? So, I mean, it's also like he goes to the gym and it's like the idea of like a 48-year-old man going to the gym was like so novel. It was like, I know, right?
Yeah, the woman called him Pops. I remember he was just trying to like throw up a barbell. That was funny. Yeah. But again, Nina was the one who was like, I'm chill with this. She was like, George, wash your hair out. You look ridiculous. She was the one who kept on bringing him back to reality and being like, it's okay to get older. Yeah. So like, again, Nina Banks, saint.
Agreed. Any like plot holes or nitpicks or anything else that we didn't talk about that didn't really make sense?
I mean, the fact that he stumbled upon his home right before a wrecking ball came through it was a little far-fetched for me.
I agree.
The sleeping pills were a bit much, as was the concept, I will say, and we haven't covered this yet, I will say the concept that George Banks, Mr. Cheap George Banks, who allegedly just recovered from having paid for his daughter's wedding, then builds out like a posh baby wing that I would be lucky to live in. Like, what? Come on.
Yeah, it's also never really clear what his deal is financially.
Right? I'm like, I think you're doing fine, Mr. Sneakerhead. But also, it was ludicrous to me to think that Frank and Howard were not only the best, most sought after wedding planners in LA, but also like interior design extraordinaires who could do baby rooms. I was like, I don't think this is a thing. I don't think people do both. I think you guys don't have like a monopoly over anything design related in the LA industry area, right?
So you weren't impressed with Frank's talents, is what you're saying?
I'm extremely impressed with Frank's talents. I just don't think they're believable.
Right. Okay, I see. Yeah. So what he was able to do is not realistic for a person to do, is what you're saying?
No, I don't think his business, especially him being, I imagine, the owner of this business, I don't think he's able to plan sick weddings and then also like pimp out a baby room. That's not something.
I mean, they shoehorned him in, right? Because in the first one, he is just like the eccentric wedding planner, which is great. And then they're like, okay, well, now he's going to like plan a baby shower, but also he's going to help us design this wing. And then
we want more scenes.
And then he's going to kind of just like be on call. He's almost like a handmaid, right? Or like a wet nurse. I don't know what exactly.
I was like, why are you at their house? You're driving them to the hospital. Like they deeply wanted Martin Short in like all of these different scenes.
Yeah,
they really pushed for it.
I agree.
It wasn't believable.
Yeah,
but I loved having him on screen. So hey.
I didn't hate it either. I didn't hate it. I would have to agree, though. I think the wrecking ball scene was.
Oh my gosh!
Because at one point it's like flying at the house, and then they just like kind of stop it. Also, like that was a little silly.
It's a little silly, but hey, I guess it was slapstick comedy or something.
It was the 90s, you know.
Yeah, it's the 90s.
Overall thoughts on the movie?
You know, I'm a sucker for Steve Martin. I think
Yeah.
he's amazing. And so I loved the movie, even though I saw it as very problematic. I see it as just like another fun part of the Father of the Bride trio. Apparently, need to see the
Yeah.
third, but yeah, I mean, I still loved it. I think it's outdated, and I think it definitely casts older people in a light that I don't think is very representative of the majority of older people, and it definitely perpetuates some ageist stereotypes. But I still thought it was a cute movie, and you can't really slam them since everybody's still doing that stuff today. So I mean, it
Yeah.
was the '90s.
Yeah, I mean, not as fun as the first one, I would say. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the first one more. Again, I think having a daughter and having a father-in-law, I think it made it a little bit more relatable for me. I don't know if like me in my 20s would have been that interested in it, but I really did. I really did enjoy both of them for that reason. And yeah, I think today, I think because most people are having kids later, people you either have grandparents that are like dying to be a grandparent, or they're genuinely getting older and it's more of a concern for them. But it's just the idea that like a 48-year-old is like bummed that he's a grandfather, I think is just not as realistic anymore.
It totally isn't. They're more likely to be like having their first child at 48 these days. So
Right. Yeah, no, you're
that's,
totally
I
right.
mean, you go to the, school and you see people. I mean, I almost felt like I was a young mom when I had my first at 32, so
Yeah.
it's just changing.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, Maureen, this has been fun. Where can people go to connect with you or learn more about you? Anything that you'd like to promote or share?
Absolutely. You can go to itgetslateearly.com. That's my website. And I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn, Maureen W. Clough on Instagram and on LinkedIn. I'll have to, I'm like, let me check real quick.
I'll link to
I was
your,
like, I can't remember it's my name in some
yeah.
way. But yeah, but It Gets Late Early is the website where you can find more about the podcast and what I'm building.
All right. Well, I will link to all that in the show notes. Maureen Wiley Clough from It Gets Late. It Gets Late Early, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Mal.
Thank you. This was a blast.